Hello and welcome to the Literary Taxidermy Reading Series. I'm Carol Jo Dixon, finalist in the 2021 Literary Taxidermy Short Story Competition. My story, and that of other finalists and winners, can be found in The Art of Death, the anthology of the Literary Taxidermy 2021 competition, available on Amazon in paperback and electronically. Here is my story, Wedding Day. I do not know why I have such a fancy. For this little cafe au lait silk dress they wanted 20 ducats. The marshland slave girl wearing it only cost 5. Lady Danakella smiles proudly at the 10 richly clad slaves she's brought for today's wedding. Elizabeth purses her lips at the interruption. Mother, she murmurs, her hand on my arm jostling my teacup. Why do I have such a huge entourage? At this rate I'll have nothing left of myself. Marcus promised I'd have only 6 bridesmaids, 10 at most. That was never going to happen. Lady Danakella scoffs, her eyes glinting maliciously over her champagne. Marcus is a duke, dear child. His wedding was always going to be a spectacle. Given that she felt that her own daughter, Emily, would make a better duchess, I have no doubt what sort of spectacle she desires. Putting down my empty teacup, I stand up. Café au lait might not be on the Archmagite's approved list of colours, I say, looking over the marshland slave. Whip-thin and hard, albeit well drugged, she has the look of a fighter, someone who's struggled for everything. She'll be trouble. Danakella intends her as such. I believe the chapel's erected now, Danakella trills. The Archmagite should be free. She clicks her fingers, and 3 attendants snap leashes onto the slave collars hidden under thick beadwork. She holds her champagne flute up for a refill, and sweeps from the bridal vestry into the cathedral proper. With friends like her, it's hard to remember who's the true enemy. The high vaulted roof above the nave is covered with faded paintings from a long ago faith. No one's even sure these days of the stories behind them. One, shot with arrows, catches my attention, as always. Does that truly depict falling in love, as so many ladies insist? Or is that a fabrication to justify this ghastly image's inclusion in such a sacred romantic place? Above the apse, the ceiling rises to an octagonal skylight, casting sunlight where an altar once stood. It's an icosahedron of spindly struts, which the church attendants are still wrapping in garlanded white camellias. Lavender and bluebells in the gaps between the fat blooms cannot quite hide the occasional sharp twinkle from the hard crystal. Guests are already assembling, sidestepping the many-wreathed flowers and satiny ribbons at the ends of the pews, sighing at the chapel. How beautiful! A young woman close by adds, and magical. When you stand in it, you can just feel the love gathering. I internally sigh at their blind dedication to grandeur and glamour. The drugged slaves are being shackled over the strut intersections in the chapel, their bonds decorated with still more flowers. Danakella is smiling as she watches. Other bridesmaids, bearing calices from wrist cuffs and heavily drugged, surround the Archmagite with muted colour, awaiting their turn to enter that crystalline trap that embraces frightened brides and disgorges picture-perfect, compliant wives. Mother! Elizabeth gasps, her hand tightening on my arm, her whole body tense to run. There are at least 20. Please tell me they're not part of the ceremony. Of course they are, silly goose, Danakella laughs. There must be no doubt that our new Duchess is the finest, fairest, most compliant wife in the land. She means to frighten Elizabeth into running. She undoubtedly has her Emily waiting nearby. Elizabeth fixes me with a look of sheer terror, and I'm so tempted to rush her away, to forget the planning and sacrifice leading to the ceremony. I wonder what her father would have wanted for her, and am suddenly glad he didn't live to see this. I'll speak to the Archmagitech, I promise. Surely there are far too many for the chapel. The Archmagitech, clad in flowing robes of white worked with gold filigree, outshines Elizabeta's bridal finery. He's tall, with a thin face that seems to have never known a spark of emotion, no laughter lines, nor frown wrinkles. It gives him a creepily beatific cast, like the near stoicism of painted, tortured saints. He hasn't aged a day in the years since he presided over my wedding, and I doubt he has since he presided over my mother's, or even my grandmother's. No one knows, save the Archmagitech, how his techno-arcane chapel works. We only know that it pushes the rebellious towards compliance. If the desired result is an agreeable wife, then choose sweet-tempered bridesmaids. If she's already agreeable, a few freshly caught wildland rebels can be pacified by serving as her bridesmaids. For a price, of course. If you want the bride to remain as she is, choose bridesmaids of similar temperament. The most common theory is that the chapel enhances compliance and redistributes it amongst the participants. It's been said over teacups that its flashes and pops signal the destruction of rebellion and resentment. Ladies will often compare their experiences. "Oh, I'm so grateful I no longer have a problem with my temper," is a common refrain, as is, "It's less exhausting now that I don't get upset as often." And, "Men could benefit from this. It's better than a day at the spa." How readily we embrace our mutilation, I muse. The chapel can accommodate 25 bridesmaids easily, the Archmagitech says, not even ruffled as he adjusts his instrument panel. There's no need to worry. I'm almost certain I see his tongue touch his thin lips. And it occurs to me that he feeds off the spirit and vitality that his chapel siphons from its prisoners, in much the same way as a spider drains flies foolish enough to enter its web. I smile, disguising my anger and disgust, and turn away before he can discern my thoughts. "There's nothing to be done," I whisper to Elizabeta. "The Archmagitech is tuned to the chapel to maximum compliance. Even if we were to reduce your entourage now, he wouldn't turn it down." I look into her eyes, whispering the words my mother spoke to me on my wedding day. "Remember yourself as you are now. Remember, even when you're forced to be someone you're not, for the good of your own daughters. Remember, whatever happens, I love you." Faint understanding flickers in her eyes. The congregation murmurs and rises as Marcus enters the cathedral. Elizabeta looks at her groom, like so many brides before her have done, with adoration, and the knowledge she can only be with him if she goes through with the ceremony. Danicella smiles as rapaciously as a shark as Elizabeta enters the chapel. She assumes the other bridesmaids are as demure as Elizabeta's public persona, and that her slaves will introduce an underlying resentment and convert Elizabeta into a shrew that Marcus will spurn within a year. I wonder whether that's what happened at Danicella's wedding, and then push the thought away. Danicella isn't the true enemy. The true enemy stares at his panel as the chapel hums to life. The true enemy nods as the slaves wake from their drugged haze. The true enemy couldn't care less whether Elizabeta struggles and screams as she's led to the chapel, or she walks with all the solemnity and grandeur the occasion demands. The slaves start screaming as the congregation bursts into rousing song. The girl in the café au lait silk struggles the hardest, although she's high above Elizabeta's head. My grandmother and my mother, both widowed early and freed from the compulsion to defer in everything to a husband, began writing all they could about the chapel in their journals. In adding to mine, it occurred to me that if you wanted to enslave a population, it would be easier to subjugate one half under the other. Then you could oppress the upper group to an astonishing degree through playing on their false superiority over the lower. I watched the Archmagiotique as the hymn ends, wondering if he even suspects the revolution brewing in sunny parlours over tea and biscuits. I wonder if he knows that I've graciously allowed first-time bridesmaids and mutinous slaves into Elizabeth's entourage, not to publicly convey confidence that my daughter's fire is proper passion for her groom, but defiance against his regime. Does he even suspect, steadily watching his control panel, that I've searched out the most recalcitrant, strong-willed and fiery women I could find to overload his infernal machine? Do you, Elizabeta, promise to love Marcus? Yes, Elizabeta agrees readily, exchanging a smile with her bridegroom. Usually the Archmagiotique would be launching into a florid speech praising the blessed state of marriage. He looks disturbed, however, frowning over his instruments, not watching the bride at all. Danakella is grinning widely, thinking her plan's working. If matters had been slightly different, she might have been a cherished confidant, maybe even a true friend. The Archmagiotique flips a switch and looks more relaxed. Do you, Elizabeta, promise to honour and respect Marcus, to support his endeavours, celebrate his successes, and console him in disappointment? I do, she says less certainly, her glance at Marcus troubled. The ceremony doesn't ask corresponding promises of him, but then he's not standing in the chapel, just outside it. I wonder what ambitions Elizabeta has, and whether he knows them. The chapel rumbles, vibrating the floor. The Archmagiotique makes a swift adjustment, but everyone has noticed. They're staring, wondering what's wrong. Do you, Elizabeta, promise to obey your husband in all things, to respect his authority and judgment in all matters, and agree to support his every decision without question? The slave above Elizabeta's head shrieks in anger. The Archmagiotique presses a button. There's a flash at the slave's back, and she slumps, now silent. Elizabeta raises her head, and I see the girl I never let be told she had to say or do or think the way others decided she should. A girl who decided for herself. The young woman who rode the wildest colt in my stables, barebacked and at full gallop, and who came back home, mud-spattered and unrepentant, simply because her escapade had felt right. No, she says, quietly but firmly. The chapel's hum ascends to an unheard of whine. The wreathed camellias burst into a snowfall of petals, revealing the glowing struts. Pulsating flashes travel their length, growing but not dissipating, building to a bright white that even outshines the Archmagiotique's robes. The congregation falls silent and looks aghast at the Archmagiotique, frantically pushing buttons and turning dials. There are a few tiny pops from the chapel, and the glow dips, but then rises again. I can no longer see Elizabeta, but can hear her repeat, "No!" The slaves begin chanting the word. It's now apparent that the chapel has been overloaded with 25 assertive, strong-willed and angry young women. The instrument panel starts popping. Lightning arcs from it onto the filigree on the Archmagiotique's robes. For a moment he seems unaffected by the sparks crackling around him. Then his body convulses. He shrieks, more from disbelief than pain, and falls, his face frozen in a macabre and beatific smile. I'm not sure he's dead until the chapel flickers and its lights fade and vanish. I can't believe that the plan, begun by my grandmother teaching her daughter how to think, has succeeded. I'd hung no hopes on it, and would have redirected any wrath from the Archmagiotique towards the scheming Lady Danakella. I'm not yet ready to rejoice that our daughters are free, and with work, one day men will be too. Danacella and I looked down on the Archmagite's body. Without an animating force, it's become quite clear that he wasn't human. The false flesh peels off his face to reveal a mushy grey mass with no true earthly comparison. Maybe it's a collective life form. Pustules have erupted where his eyes should have been. They remind me, somehow, disgustingly, of mushrooms. If you've made it to the end of this video, thank you so much. I love you all. I'm Carol Jo Dixon, co-founder and convener of the Penhaven Writers Group. If you are an aspiring writer and having trouble on your creative journey, please check out my blog at www.soppydragon.wordpress.com, where I've added pages to help you in every aspect of writing. Thank you all for watching and have a wonderful day.